Hello, dear audience. We are continuing our conversations on the theme Feast of Healthy Thoughts on a topic that is very important and kind of puzzling for the whole society throughout the human history. Humanity has come up with all kinds of technological advancements, has created all kinds of tools to better their lives, but we are still suffering, and we have not given any scientific answer to death. And it is a puzzling question for humanity. We have created drugs to kill our pain, but it's only temporary that we get relief from this. And today we will talk about both suffering and joy and happiness that may or may not be the opposites of each other. We'll find out, and Dr. Kiyaki will help us to understand better from psychological perspective, and also, most importantly, from theological perspective, why do we have to suffer as creatures of God, and also as just human beings, maybe not even from spiritual perspective, but why does human beings suffer? Why does creation suffer? Because if we watch around us, it's not only humans that suffer, but the animals, maybe even the plants. We don't know it yet. But there is the suffering. It is an existence. It's a presence in our life. We experience it. We see it around us. Sometimes we suffer with the suffering of the others, and therefore we need answers, or perhaps we need to ponder and pray about it. Thank you, Presbytero, for being with us. Perhaps we can go through those questions. But I would like to bring one example. It's the story of Adam crying outside of the Garden of Eden. Theologians of the Orthodox Church write about it. Perhaps that's the first expression of the suffering. Or maybe his suffering started from the moment he felt that he had to hide from God. What do you think about these things?
Thank you, Arkady. Hi, everyone. It's a blessing to be here with you again. It really is a blessing to be here with you again. We've been doing these conversations for a number of years now and enjoying them thoroughly. So the audience knows these are real conversations. We might come prepared, thinking, studying for the topic, but we don't come in with any specific idea what we're going to say. We really are talking with each other, with you, the audience, listening in, and with you in mind, so that hopefully what we say will be of some benefit. But as you started to speak, I started to think, wow, how would I begin? And actually you began the way I was hoping I would begin, which is Adam and Eve. The story of Adam and Eve, which is, from a Judeo-Christian perspective, reflects the story of humanity's relationship with God and itself and all of creation. And from our Orthodox Christian perspective, that account points to the loss of communion between God and humanity. That Adam and Eve, before the fall, when they were tempted by the serpent and ate of the fruit, which gave the knowledge of good and evil, we have believed that humanity was perfect in a kind of potential way, perfect and beautiful, and the potential was because as Adam and Eve were created in the image and after the likeness of God, that the potential was for them to grow in communion with the Lord and one another. And what the story says is that they were tempted, and the temptation was to love something else other than the loving God, the author of life. And so the love of self, or the sin of pride, which is a handy way we in the Orthodox East often refer to the fall of Adam and Eve, that Adam and Eve succumbed to the sin of pride. And what's pride? The desire to be God without God. And God's all-powerful, so it's the desire for power, control, and everything that belongs to God. Now, the funny thing is, originally God wanted to share all this with humanity, and at the same time humanity had to grow through their use of free will to the point where all of this could be shared. But as I said a couple of minutes ago, that they sinned by choosing another love of pride, love of themselves, love of power, as opposed to the love of God. And so because of that, when Adam and Eve succumbed, they broke that growing communion with God. And so when you remember the story, they fell, and toward the later on in that day, whatever that means, God went through the garden looking for them. Now, God knew where they were. And there are two trains of thought that many theologians and wise people through the church look at that. The first is that Adam and Eve, because of their own free will, ended communion with God. They introduced the absence of life. They introduced death into their part of creation. And so because of that, that growing relationship ended. And so when God is in the garden saying, Adam, where are you? Looking for Adam to connect with him. Two things are being done. One, it's indicating that the communion was lost. Because up until then, God did not need to ask where Adam or Eve was. They were always connecting through the growing communion. And the second is by God asking, where are you? Where are you? It was giving Adam and Eve a chance to repent, giving them a chance to say, oh Lord, what have we done? And they didn't. And so from that time forward, all relationships and life from that perspective of growing in God, where there was no death, life became corrupted, and death and illness and limitation was introduced into creation. Now, God being God, many fathers in the church, fathers and mothers, affirm that God had a plan B, plan C, plan. God knew immediately how to respond because God is complete love, unconditional love, absolute love. And so as to find a way to rectify and to build that bridge to bring humanity back to him, which was the incarnation of the second person of the Trinity, the Logos, Jesus Christ, who we believe is God. That was foretold even at that moment when God was telling Adam and Eve the consequences of their sin, how they will be cursed for the choice they made to turn away from life. They were seduced. If you read the account, Eve was seduced by the serpent to love something other than authentic love. And so because of that, a dynamic that God did not create of sin, of suffering, of illness, of death was introduced into the world that we still are dealing with, that we still have to experience as fallen human beings in one way or other every day of our lives.
Like Anthony Bloom says, nobody has been there. We don't know exactly what happened there. Nobody has recorded it. Perhaps by revelation we do know, but there's one fact in the Bible where when Adam and Eve feel like they have been separated from God, they feel ashamed, and then after God finds them, he puts skin clothes on them. And that word skin clothes has always taken my attention. Where from did this come? And now when we talk about suffering, it drew my attention back to that again, where if there was a skin, it means there was death and there was suffering. Perhaps humans hadn't suffered yet, but there was suffering in the creation already in the result of this sin. And the animals were kind of the target of the suffering, for the first suffering. They became skin clothes for the humans. Simeon, the new theologian, talks about the creation and the fall of Adam and Eve, and he says that the creation is patiently waiting for us until we
That's beautiful.
we get out of this hole, and they will be liberated with us. You mentioned about repentance. Once he was expelled from the garden, some theologians say that he cried at the gate of the...
As Metropolitan Anthony Bloom said, I wasn't there, but he realized he was at the gate. He could no longer have the communion. He was outside the gate of the paradise that was lost, that relationship of ongoing love and growing love in the presence and with God and one another. And so that there is a kind of deep intuition that Adam cried, Adam experienced sorrow. Yes, good.
And as a psychologist, how do you look at crying? Is that a relief from suffering? I've been a crying baby. When I was young, I cried a lot. And I think it kind of made it lighter. It made it easier to carry the suffering?
There's lots of reasons why people cry. It's a sweet story that you're sharing of being a little child and something being taken away from you, something that you felt you owned or belonged to you as part of you, and when it was taken away from you, there was that loss. Again, like Adam lost everything. As a little child, you felt like you lost everything, perhaps, or something important to you that you weren't expecting. And so, yeah, the tears could be sadness, the tears could be anger, the tears could be sorrow. And so there are lots of reasons why there's tears. And if you felt lighter after that, there's a compensation, I think, that happens after tears, that it's also a way of letting go. Even as we try to hold on and we feel the sadness, sometimes when we cry, sometimes we have to cry often if the loss is very big. But there's frequently at least some degree of solace or comfort. Tears can be healing, tears can be comforting, tears can be cleansing.
That's very interesting you mentioned cleansing part, because I remember our favorite Gregory of Narek mentions about in his prayers to God, please do not dry the source of my tears. And he says, one drop of tears mightier than
legions of demons.
Yes,
legions of demons. I love St. Gregory of Narek.
He compares it to a salt that that kills multiple worms. What is the importance of the tear in a spiritual world as a form of repentance?
There's at least two levels. There's the regular type of tears that we were just talking about that come from loss of, even not just the loss of a toy, or even as an adult, I lost my favorite whatever, bye-bye, I'm sad, I'm mad, I cry. We can have those kinds of superficial attachments to things that shouldn't have that importance in our lives, and we cry over that, and okay. Sometimes the tears remind us, oh, why am I crying over this? Okay, we all have those occasionally, I think.
Sometimes I would get tired in the middle of it and just start like, why am I crying?
Yeah, why am I crying? And so then we realize the pain that we're investing in whatever we're crying about is not worth the thing that we lost. And in a sense, that's already healing to some degree. Then there's another kind of tears that happens when it's over something big that will not easily be rectified, be it our own health, the health of a loved one, the loss of a relationship. There's been many types of catastrophic losses that people go through that if we all live long enough, we will probably taste something in that venue, I'm sorry to say, or maybe I should be glad to say, I don't know. But I don't wish that on anyone, including us, because God is not a God of pain. God is not one who intentionally tries to set people up for their demise in the worst sense of that word. The good news is that God works through all of these issues for the good, especially if we give him opportunity to do that. And so sometimes we have to limp along, praying, trusting, crying, but giving people an opportunity to let God work, in a sense, organically through the process. And it's often a process that can take weeks or years before we turn the corner of something important.
Again, Metropolitan Anthony speaks about his spiritual father, and he says that he cried serving liturgy, and later on, when he was a priest himself, he recognized that he had the pain and suffering for the whole humanity when he was serving liturgy, knowing that what the gifts on the table are for the salvation of the humanity, and he was feeling that suffering.
For the life of the world.
For the life of the world.
And he was feeling all that.
Yes.
What you're pointing to is the second thing I should have said, which I forgot, so thank you. And that is the second general type of tears is the gift of tears. Mm-hmm. And that while the first gift, as I said earlier, is not completely disconnected from the second gift are a kind of cleansing tears that are naturally take place when, as someone becomes closer to God, and God, in a sense, starts revealing himself in their soul. And so the communion with God, that person is experiencing a growing experience of communion, and we refer to that process as the process of theosis in the Greek-speaking Orthodox Christian Church. But part of the road to theosis is the gift of tears. It's a gift of cleansing, repentance, and it's not necessarily a sadness, but it's a kind of exquisite awareness of one's own finiteness in the presence of God and the gift of the world. And so if Father Athanasius, the spiritual father of Metropolitan Anthony Bloom, had the gift of tears during the celebration of the Holy Eucharist, his heart was beating with the heart of God and was feeling, I would say, he was experiencing the gift of the compassion of God for his people in that moment.
In Orthodox theology, and actually I learned this in the Armenian theology, that God cannot suffer. But when we look from this perspective where God created and his creation fell, do you think that from just humanly, is it possible that God would have some kind of suffering in his heart? And
in a way we don't understand, absolutely yes. In a way because God is God. God is absolute love. God is beyond our understanding. We can't conceptualize who he is. And at the same time, God calls us to communion with him and in him and through him by the grace of the Holy Spirit, who abides in us because of the love of the Lord Jesus Christ, who became human and abides with the Father at this moment as we speak. Why would God become human if he didn't care? Mm-hmm. The Greek word for the second person of the Trinity, the Logos, becoming human, is the word kenosis. Kenos and eofton. He completely and utterly emptied himself. And some of you who may have seen these episodes before, the Greek almost points to a kind of gutting himself. So God gutted himself out of love for us. And so does God suffer? I think for each one of us, he suffers in a way we don't understand. And not for the sake of that he needs us in any way, except that he loves us for the sake of love. I mean, think about it. How many parents who love their children ache with joy as they watch the child try to take his or her first steps? Even at liturgy this week, there was a little baby on the floor. I was sitting on the floor, I'm confessing, with your daughter in the back of the church, and she was the second youngest at that moment in the back of the church with this other little baby about 9 months old. I don't know if you saw it because you were serving, but the grandmother was trying to encourage the baby to take a step during liturgy. I think she thought it was kind of cool. And the love that she had in her face for the baby, even during liturgy when we were all praying at the same time also, and also watching the children in the back end of the church where the cheap seats are, where we are. But it was a sweet gift because that reminds me of the love that God has for each of us, that he waits with bated breath for us to take a step toward him. If human parents feel this way, and grandparents for their children, how much more God for us?
Sometimes people who maybe believe in God halfway or don't believe in God, if we talk about suffering, they would throw blame towards perhaps existing God in their mind, saying, if there is God, why is there suffering? We're talking about God is love, unconditional. God suffered for us.
One reason why I was a little bit late coming down today is I was at the office today, and a neighbor that I haven't seen in a long time said, can I come by and visit you? And I said, well, you have to come to the office because from the office I have to go to Watertown. It was wonderful. And when he used to live closer to us, he used to talk about, I knew he was a veteran who suffered from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. He had seen a lot of action at one point and was having a hard time then making his life make sense because the trauma was getting the best of him. And as a neighbor, I could be his friend. I couldn't be his psychologist, and I couldn't be his pastor, right? Because there are other people that were there for that. And so I haven't seen him in years. He came by today and talked about the consequences of his suffering with the PTSD, and that it's been an uphill battle. And some of the battles have been won, thank God. But when I asked him, he's facing another battle at the end of this week, which is why he came by. And he said, well, you know, what advice do you have for me? And I said, I'll call him Joe. His name is not Joe. Joe, where are your spiritual resources? And then Joe went off. And in all the years I've known him, we never talked about religion per se. And he said, I don't want to talk religion. I don't want to talk about the church. I don't want to talk about people in the church. I don't want to talk about the clergy. And he went on and on and on. And he said, I go into a church, and he talked about the part of Christianity that he grew up in, and I get nauseous. I get physically sick. And I said, okay, Joe, understood, understood. And so, but I hear you've done a lot of work. You've been climbing this uphill battle with the suffering from the PTSD, and you are going to be facing some legal issues that he's facing at the end of the week that are serious, and the legal types that he's facing are going to be adversarial, that you're guilty till proven innocent, because he's asking for some kind of federal help, and he needs the help, and he's a good man, and that's the reason why this help was made to begin with, but I guess they're trying to make sure that it's people who really need it who are getting this help, and not people who are trying to scam the system, which I'm sure exists also all over the world, never mind just in the United States. But he was starting to go into a trauma response even in the office today. And so I said to him, Joe, where's your relationship with your higher power, God, whatever you want to call him? I'm going to call him God because that's the word I use for myself. And so we spent the visit mostly finding ways for him to rest in the reality that he could not have come to this point, which is true, of climbing so far up this hill by himself with all the issues that have come as a result of the PTSD. And he said, I'm feeling calmer because, well, I came to visit you. And I thought, well, we haven't seen each other. It's sweet that you came to see me. But I completed, I said, I think it's because you're coming clean with your relationship with God, that you're acknowledging as he's helped carry you through this, and that all you need to do is just keep resting in him, even if you forget from time to time, because under this kind of re-traumatizing you might be experiencing at the end of the week with facing these people that you have to face, I think will be an extra important dimension for you to go through this in a way that will feel best for you. I think our suffering, even on a cellular level, when we are able to surrender our control, because he was trying to control everything, but by being able to manage what he's supposed to manage, but give the rest to God, or trust that it's a loving God that's holding him, that's been holding him, it's a lot less work.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that you mentioned about the control and suffering together. I watched a sci-fi movie. At one point there was something very interesting. This woman who had extra powers, and she approached the person who had the information in his mind. She could get hold of information if she could stop his mind, mental activities. And the only way she could do that is giving him extreme pain. And he pierced with his hands with knives. And the movie dictator explains that at this moment, this man concentrated only on one thing, on the pain of his hands, nothing else. Then she accessed the information in his brain.
So it was like a diversion.
Yes, okay. It's like the pain takes our attention completely from everything else. What I learned from that is that having pain, having suffering, we cannot concentrate on the surrounding or even our inside. We draw our attention towards the pain.
That's right. And suffering, there's a level of suffering that, and you've, in earlier episodes, you've kindly let me talk about Simone Weil, the philosopher, Jewish philosopher who became Christian during World War II, and who talked about types of suffering. And obviously she was in Europe during World War II, so she saw a lot of suffering happen right before her because she was Jewish, and she saw a lot of people disappear and never reappear again, and identified with the pain of the people who were being objectified and hated. Talked about there's all kinds of suffering, and all suffering is experienced as bad by the human person experiencing that. But there's a degree of suffering that's so immense. She called it malheur, a kind of suffering that is beyond the extreme, where you can't think, you can't pray. She said that at that point of suffering, you lose half of your soul. Mm. And the early fathers of the church would talk about this kind of suffering. And their insights were that when people suffer to this degree, half of their free will is made inoperative. Because maybe because of the distraction of the pain, maybe because of the distraction of whatever the suffering is happening. And so, and that, ironically, that's a comfort for me. If the ancient sages of the life in Christ say that it's harder for people who are oppressed at this level to use their free will because it's like half of it is gone, it gives me a sense of the compassion of God. That, oh, well, if these people saw it, then of course God understands. But that makes it more important to use whatever little bit of free will we have, even if it doesn't make a difference, to at least keep turning toward love, at least keep turning toward the possibility of love, if we can't have the love, or the direction of where love would be coming from, if it could come, even if we don't ever expect it to come. And so, yes, there are types of suffering where you can't pray. And so that's why, for those of us who are in a less bad situation, for those of us who can pray, we should pray. For those of us who can do good, we should do good. We should be extra. I'm so grateful we're talking during Great Lent right now. We're entering the third week of Great Lent, because one of the main stances of the Church from her beginnings, during the time of the Christianity preparing for the resurrection of the Lord, Christians would mark that time with prayer and fasting and almsgiving and doing good work. And so Great Lent should be a time of us being even more aware of the suffering around us, to put aside our self-satisfied daily activity and to see what good we can do for those who cannot speak for themselves, those who cannot pray for themselves.
Do you think that this type of suffering that cuts us off from our own power of will, that we can not even pray, can be compared to the suffering that the Christians suffer in the early centuries? Because I have noticed that in a contemporary society, it is almost impossible for people to relate to the suffering of the early Christians. When we read the stories of the martyrs, sometimes it's beyond comprehension what kind of suffering they went through.
Here's a lesson for us. Here's a lesson for us in the West. All we have to look at now is the evening news and to see the kind of oppression Christians in other parts of the world are experiencing under the hands of extremists.
Yes.
And what's sad is it's almost like theme and variations. They're being beheaded, they're being burned, they're being skinned alive, the women are being raped, hands are being cut off, legs are being cut off. And when you go to certain Orthodox churches in various parts of the old world, you'll see in the narthex, for example, icons of how people were martyred. And yes, they can be kind of frightening. And in fact, my husband and I went to a monastery on the island of Syros many years ago, a convent where the women had an orphanage for children, and the children were afraid of going into church because I think the nuns were there first and they started the orphanage a number of years later. And the icons were there to remind the adults about what it means to be a Christian, but then when they started the orphanage, the kids would come in and they'd be a little scared to see they weren't ready to understand what that means at their level. When we were visiting, they were changing the icons around. I'm sure there are many other churches in the Orthodox Old World where you'll still find these scenes to remind us what has happened in the past. And I don't think it's completely gone away and now is resurging again.
It's interesting you mentioned draw the parallel. I remember a quote from Callistos Ware's book where he says that at the beginning of 20th century there were more Christians martyred than first 300 years of Christianity, when we are drawing our images of suffering of Christians. They say that the great father of the nation, Stalin, killed more people than World War did. He was, from some sources, they say that he was a bitter graduate of seminary. Perhaps an anecdotal story about his mother visiting him, and then she was leaving. He was, I guess, saying goodbye. The last words that she said was, "It would be better if you became a priest." And today, since we're talking about these 21st century tragedies, today I came to a comparison or a drawing of 20th century sufferings. And the author is, I think, a Catholic priest who says, 1945 and Auschwitz and other places of suffering showed what humanity is capable of. And Hiroshima showed what the power is in human hands, what can be done by human invention. So there is suffering. We talked about Adam and Eve, suffering in the result of separation from God. But then it seems like that suffering grew and grew and grew, and in some respect it is the humans who are responsible for more suffering in the result, I guess, of the separation. But I don't want to blame the humans either. Sometimes the classical answer to suffering is that we cause the suffering.
It's both and.
Yes.
Suffering happens. There could be a natural catastrophe. There are, and I'll just leave it at that, fill in the blank. Suffering happens when political changes happen in a country and some opposing force comes in and starts treating the people who are there like they have no value and wind up ending a people in one way or other, either killing people off or enslaving them. There are many occasions where suffering occurs and it's not our fault. We didn't invite such and such a thing to happen. So that's true. And we don't want to blame the victim. It's so easy to blame the victim. But if we look at the victim as our brother or sister, or that the victim is us in some way, then it is, I think, more healthy from a spiritual Christian perspective to remember that we're all connected. So however natural forces may occur to cause suffering, or if suffering occurs at the hands by human beings on other human beings, the people who receive the suffering, we somehow, and I can't prove this, but we are all deeply interconnected. And so to acknowledge the suffering of humankind, to see humanity in terms of our brother and our sister in the presence of God, I think is the beginning of helping in the relief of that. We're not God, we can't cause healing, but I think God loves it when we pray for, when we strive to lighten other people's suffering. And I do think God blesses that in ways we don't understand.
I asked our audience to give us some questions. And I received a few emails about suffering. And one of them was, why do bad things happen to good people?
And there is a sweet book that was written not too many years ago, I think with that title, written by a rabbi, I'm not sure. A very sweet book which does touch on similar insights. And we have to remember that all suffering, even if God does not impose that on us, it's never outside the love of God. And that much like when you've heard me say on this program with you before, when we talk about going in and finding a quiet place within ourselves in the presence of God, and sometimes people, balk at that. When I talk about this with them in private, they say, I don't want to go inside myself to find God there. I've also got my own inner crap in there. I've got my own inner demons, my own inner dragons, my own inner unresolved issues and traumas. And I said, that's all the more reason to trust that the love of God is stronger than all of these other issues that the creator of the universe, who made you in his image and after his likeness, cares about you, is connected with you. And so it's a way of resting in that and trusting in that and giving that more room in your own psyche to move. Because sometimes we're the ones that slow down healing, slow down connecting with others because of our own, we're not ready, our own fears, or our own obstinacy. Sometimes I can be very stubborn. And so sometimes when we are going through a phase in our lives where we suffer, it is good to remember, this too shall pass. This is something that's said often in many of the recovery movements, this too shall pass. But to trust that if we suffer well, if we suffer with our eyes open and with humility, so that we are supple as we go forward, we wind up benefiting in some way from the process.
I was going to ask you that. There are different ways of suffering, perhaps. Some kind of suffering that takes us to despair, and some kind of suffering that takes us on the other side, a different person, and go into the suffering that Christ endured on this earth. Perhaps even to talk about the fact that he did not want to suffer at one point. He asked, Father, take this cup away from me.
That's healthy. Mm-hmm. Even Sigmund Freud said the desire to avoid pain is a healthy thing. Mm-hmm. So I should say even, but it's healthy to want to avoid pain, and so I don't want needless suffering. I think suffering's going to happen. I think if we subtly seek suffering, then we lose opportunities for joy, we lose opportunities for growth, we lose opportunities for connection. We wind up defining what the suffering's about, then we wind up getting lost in our own thoughts and definition of reality, when God might be asking us to reach out to others in love anyway while we are in pain. Mm-hmm. And that can be very difficult and very rewarding at the same time.
This is a very good point to transition, because we have to also speak about joy. I am not sure if we will get to the joy, but at least to talk about the transition or avoidance of suffering or fight against the suffering. People try to hide from the suffering, try to kill it, try to avoid it, and there are many ways of doing it. And some ways that stop the suffering and the pain are worse than the pain itself.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So I would like you to talk about this a little bit.
There's all kinds. I see it all the time, and I'm sure you've seen it, and many people in our audience experience this or see this, that sometimes we're not ready. I don't want to, we're not ready to acknowledge the depth of whatever it is that's causing us pain or suffering, be it something that happened in our youth, be it something that happened when we were teenagers or adults. So we spend a lot of energy denying it or redefining it according to what we think. Yes. And sometimes that happens because we're not ready, and in a way we can learn from that so that when we are ready, and the growth happens in a rapid way and in a way that's kind of miraculous. But oftentimes people will do we live in a society that just goes on the surface and says everything has to be okay, and just go shopping or just buy this and everything will be fine. Look the part and everything will be great underneath. And sometimes if I throw on something on the outside that makes me feel more prepared to meet the day and I feel prettier for that day, it does do a difference on the inside, but it doesn't clean me up. I can't touch that. Or it can help promote the road to touch that, but it does not do the work. And so I think all of us, if we're honest with ourselves, will acknowledge we've done that a lot in some way or other. I know I have. And it's a gift when we get to the point of that issue that we've been hiding is revealed. And so, yes, there's a flood of tears. Yes, there's that cleansing. Yes, there's that aha of sadness, perhaps. Oh, I've been doing all this because of such and such pain that happened when I was young, or such a thing that happened in my life that caused a loss of separation. But by acknowledging that, there's a great healing in the depths of the person's soul, where we come out more whole. And we go from there.
Thank you very much, Presbytera. We will continue our conversation with this aspect of pain, where we will talk about how do we transition from it, or how do people transition from it. What unhealthy transitions have you seen, and how can people reverse that? Thank you very much again. This was a wonderful conversation. I learned a lot. Dr. Fitzgerald, thank you very much. See you next time.